Welcome back to the Daily Poem here on the Close Reads Podcast Network. I'm David Kern, and today is Thursday, May 14th, 2020. Today I'm going to read you a poem by Walt Whitman, perhaps the American poet, the quintessential American poet. Maybe he is, Ezra Pound referred to him as America's poet. He is America, said Pound. Whitman lived from 1819 to 1892, is probably most famous for his long work, Leaves of Grass, and other poems like O Captain, My Captain. At some point, I'd like to read to you When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, but it's quite long, and so I'll save that. But it's maybe my favorite Whitman poem, actually. But the one that I am going to read to you today is much shorter. It's only, 10 lines? It's called A Noiseless Patient Spider. It goes like this. A noiseless patient spider I marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated, marked how to explore the vacant, vast surrounding. It launched forth filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O my soul, where you stand, surrounded, detached, in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them, till the bridge you will need be formed, till the ductile anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling, catch somewhere, O my soul. So this is a poem from around 1891. At least it was published then. It was published in an edition of Leaves of Grass from that year. It was originally part of a poem called Whispers of Heavenly Death, which was written for The Broadway, a magazine out of London, about 20 years earlier than Leaves of Grass, than the Leaves of Grass edition, but then was also published again in 1871. So it was, bounced around a little bit, and before it became part of the Whitman canon in the Leaves of Grass, kind of got memorialized in that way. I was laughing because when I went to go look up the publication date of this poem, on Wikipedia, I kind of scrolled down to see what they say, and the summary of this poem has a section, and the section header is called Imagery, and it says in there, quote, "It is difficult to find even one line that does not contain a vivid image," end quote. I kind of chuckled because I thought, well, that's kind of the nature of poetry, and so I kind of was being a little condescending to whoever wrote that, and that's not fair. And then I got to thinking, well, in a way, this is a poem that is an image about images, because it's about someone looking at a spider and that image becoming meaningful to them, as if they were reading a poem about a spider and the poem itself became meaningful to them. So in a way, the spider itself that's sitting there that Whitman's looking at, or, whatever perspective he's using is looking at, becomes a poem in and of itself. So the way that we experience the world in images, the way that images themselves are transformed into meaningful thought by our imagination, is the work of poetry. And yet it's also just the work of the world. Our experiences within the world are poems in and of themselves. It's our job to give, it's our imagination's job, I suppose, to give form and structure to those, to comprehend, to contemplate them enough to comprehend the meaning of what we're experiencing. But sometimes, as with certain poems, we don't know what that means for so long. We have to live with an image for a very long time. So I wonder how long Whitman lived with this image of this spider spinning its web before he could get to that second stanza, before he could, allow his imagination to create meaning. How long did the contemplation take before he was able to associate some sort of meaning with it, especially in a way that he was able to express, via pen, or pencil, to express via lines that he could pass on to us. I found that whole process really fascinating, and on the one hand, I'd love to know the story, and on the other hand, I kind of don't. I kind of like the mystery of not knowing the answers to those questions. One other thing I love about Whitman is the way he throws his syllables together. Whitman's a master at making you slow down. A noiseless, patient spider. Like, you can't say that quickly. I marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated. That it stood isolated in some ways feels like it should be on a different line than I marked where on a little promontory, especially after the first line is short. So the variation of length lines and the way he throws his syllables together is so creative and interesting. I don't always, I think it's fun to kind of argue with Whitman to, about the choices that he makes and wonder why he chose to use specific forms or specific line breaks, or why he didn't in-jam a line together or something like that. He's a fun poet to argue with. Of course, I suppose you can't argue with success, but I don't mean argue with him in a way that's, combative. I just mean kind of, argue with him as you're reading and try to decipher what he's doing. But he always makes you slow down. He controls the pace of his poems so carefully. And I think that even if you might disagree with the philosophies behind Whitman's work or whatever, maybe you don't believe that he is, truly the quintessential American poet the way Ezra Pound did. But nonetheless, his capacity to measure the pace at which you read or hear and thus experience his poems is really profound and worth, I think, noting, especially for people who want to be poets, or at least study poetry closely. All right, so with that, here is A Noiseless Patient Spider one more time. A noiseless, patient spider, I marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated, marked how to explore the vacant, vast surrounding. It launched forth filament, filament, filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O my soul, where you stand, surrounded, detached in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them, till the bridge you will need be formed, till the ductile anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling, catch somewhere, O my soul. This has been the Daily Poem. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back tomorrow